I was attempting to get a beer at the old pub when I met an attractive woman who had been murdered 40 years after I died. She told me that it was no use. She'd been trying to get the attention of every bartender that filed in and out of this place for decades. None would ever see her, much less pour her some Jamesons. So I asked her what she does with herself in this place. She shrugged and said that when she isn't attempting to get a drink, she occasionally lurks in the men's room and scares students. Good for a laugh, she says. Can you leave this place, I ask? She said she never tried, but feels that she'll leave once she gets her whiskey. As I pondered this, I gaze out the window, and I see something familiar. Oh yeah, this is the last place I stood on solid ground. Things have changed a bit in this neighborhood since 1860, but every now and again, something comes back to me. Like the little house I used to live in, which appropriately enough has been moved into a graveyard. It used to be here in what is now a park. It's a pity because, oddly enough, there are actually more souls here that I can interact with than in the graveyard. The dead were at least lucky to end up in their own graves. My pa used to tell us stories from the old country, including one about a man named Jack, who, to make a long story short, cheated both an angel and a demon and was allowed into neither heaven nor hell. He used to walk the earth for the rest of eternity using a turnip as a lantern to light his way. It was at the crossroad of Plevick and Fitzsimmons, not too far from my old house, when I ran into him. I asked him why he now carried a lit pumpkin instead of a turnip. He laughed and said, "Because I'm in America now." We parted ways knowing that we would run into each other again, not before long. But we seemed to sense that while he is in this state for eternity, I am only wandering for a finite period. As he faded into the distance, I gazed into the woods. And I remember how when I was about 10, a friend of mine who used to live on this road swore that on several occasions in the woods or in the cattails he saw a huge glowing dog. The shadow beast, he called it. I knew even then he was just talking bullshit, and it didn't really scare me or anything like that, but it did kind of instill a sense of something being out there. Even if this beast didn't exist, I could certainly picture it stalking these woods. There's a few like myself in this place. It was here that the mob operated many years after my time. Beneath this unassuming building was a front for bootlegging operations, and beneath that still are several who made the bad choice of crossing the mob. But quite literally, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's little of my neighborhood left. The Bloody Third, that's what we lived in when we moved to the city. It was a rough town. I remember the time me and the boys, the cowboys, the gang we formed while working in the packing house, declared war on the whole of the police department. One of us that could write wrote our challenge and nailed it to the police station doors. We'd get into some good fights on the frozen river in winter with the gangs who lived on Tory Hill. Ah, yes, the river, it's coming back to me. I remember sailing away on a ship to Chicago in 1860. I was in the Union Guard at the time. Apparently the unit I was in got kicked out of the Army for believing that Wisconsin should split from the Union, or something like that. Anyway, after meeting with another militia in Chicago, we began the return voyage home up Lake Michigan. The last thing I remember was hearing polka music from the band aboard the ship as I was about to get a beer. Next thing I know, I'm running out of the water and down a road, reaching the gates of a cemetery. I repeat this many times. After a while, I questioned myself why I'm doing this. All I could think of was going home. I guess the logistics of being a ghost hadn't entered my mind yet, because usually it takes more than a lock to prevent me from gaining entry anywhere. Finally, the groundskeeper absent-mindedly left the gate open one night, and I'm able to enter. I find graves of many people I knew, graves that bear the inscription "Lost on the Lady Elgin," but none of them were mine. Upon returning to the Third Ward, I find that things have changed. It is full of new buildings, as most everything was burned to the ground in the 1890s. I found a woman running in and out of a building, still looking for any hotel guest that needed to be rescued. I was glad to find a familiar building that was once a pub in my day, that another spirit inhabited it. He told me that it was the handiwork of the Italian gangs trying to kick us Irish out. In the meantime, I wander around the area, talking to those who I am able to, and ponder why I have inherited this fate. Perhaps it's because I'm looking for my grave. Maybe I'm still at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Perhaps I ended up here in one of the old potter's fields, where the unknown and the poor were buried anonymous. One of the inhabitants said he couldn't rest because the ground wasn't consecrated, and still another said how he wasn't left coins on his eyes for the ferryman. And still another remarked that the ferryman wouldn't take his coins and grumbled something about inflation. So I'm just wandering around, hearing the stories and observing the changes. Hopefully I can proceed to the next quest and my unfinished business will be resolved. Maybe I just need a beer.